What are some dark facts about cartoon shows? Story 1. Ren and Stimpy was an absolute nightmare for the people who worked on it. John K. ordered them not to make the same face twice. Pretty, but it was hell for the workers because they were constantly drawing things. John K. was a nightmare boss. One of the producers had a sign on his wall labeled John's Knees and invited people to kick it. By the time he left, it was reduced to a hole. They made several episodes that were just the animators ranting about how much of an asshole that John K. was. Story 2. The pilot of The Grim Adventures of Bill and Mandy, called Trepanation of the Skull and You, tells kids that because of a mistaken evolution, our skulls are too small for our brains, and that you should drill a hole in your skull as to grant the brain more space, which is then followed by Billy doing exactly that. The whole thing looks like some cursed forgotten videotape. That whole show was a fever dream from what I can remember. It really was. It was even crazier when it was grim and evil. I have two vague memories from that, both involving musical episodes. The Billy and Mandy one was about a brain-eating alien, eating everyone's brains in town. The evil Con Carn was one about eating too much pie. I'm not entirely convinced they were real. Story 3. Tiny Toons, early 90s, was allegedly cancelled, replaced with Animaniacs, because some creepy guy was super obsessed. The whole article is insane and worth the read. Certain individuals were hammering the voice actors, writers, and animators with unwanted attention, and, even less wanted, information on the prurient nature of their fixations. In other words, enough people were mailing WB Studios wanting to see Babs Bunny naked that it started to become something of a problem. As one of these stalker fans, Dennis Falk, was quite interested in Tress MacNeille, a legendary voice actress. She was not only the voice of Babs Bunny, but is also well known for roles in everything from The Simpsons and The Critic to the computer game Full Throttle. Falk, along with several others, somehow got hold of her contact information and started hammering her with obscene mail containing various sex fantasies about the characters she voiced. Story 4. Not so much about the production, but there is an obscure animated movie called The Adventures of Mark Twain that is stop-motion animated, and in one pretty fucked-up scene, Tom Sawyer, Huck Finn, and Becky are greeted by an angel who says his name is Satan. Except he looks nothing like the traditional angel. He holds a mask on a stick for a face which contorts into a demon and skeletal face at times. He then has the kids sculpt a village with people and a castle out of sand, and Satan then brings them to life. The sand people get along, but soon start fighting, and Satan kills them just by summoning lightning, causing an earthquake, etc. The kids are horrified, but Satan just nonchalantly says they can make more, and waxes poetic about how life is a vision and we don't matter. I can't really do justice describing how eerie it is, but if you look up disturbing kids' cartoons on YouTube, it'll pop up. Story 5. The voice actor for Uncle Iroh was struggling with esophageal cancer, and when he was singing Leaves from the Vine, his voice cracked, and he sang with the emotion he had been carrying, making Iroh's sadness all the more real. R.I.P. Mako. Story 6. While this isn't necessarily a cartoon as it has live-action bits, but it is still a tragic one. It was also a courageous move on the TV station's part. When Will Lee, who played Mr. Hopper, died, there was a dilemma for the cast of Sesame Street. He was well liked by both viewers and the cast. The cast knew children would notice, but it was also clear would have wanted them to move on. Despite objections, the show went on with the talk about death, with Big Bird taking it hard. The adults spoke about the matter and how life has to go on, which Hooper would have loved. This was a brave move for a children's show since it was also educational, the main format. Story 7. The villain in the film Pound Puppies, The Legend of the Big Paw, was voiced by George Rose, an accomplished stage actor whose roles had included the Major General in Pirates of Penzance. Shortly after the film's release, he was beaten to death by his own adopted son. Story 8. Donna Hill was a popular and prominent voice actress in the 80s and 90s. Among her more famous roles are Tank Muddlefoot and Darkwing Duck and Max from Goof Troop, but she also played Jerry in the Tom and Jerry movie, and Audrey Griswold in National Lampoon's European Vacation. She was a star child athlete, but after being diagnosed with diabetes when she was 10, had to give up on that career and went into acting instead. In 1966, she fell into a diabetic coma leading to a stroke, which caused her death. She was only 32. Story 9. The studio had to get someone else to sing Soon You'll Come Home in All Dogs Go to Heaven because the voice actor Judith Barcy had such a traumatic home life because of an abusive alcoholic father that she couldn't sing the song without having a breakdown. She and her mother were murdered by him before the movie was released in a double murder/self-destruction. She was only 10. She was also the voice of Ducky from Land Before Time. Her tombstone reads, "Yep, yep, yep." Every time I think about this, I just wonder how the hell someone didn't step in and get that little girl out of that situation. I mean, she worked on major movies. She must have been surrounded by adults who should have been able to pick up on what was going on in her home life. The fact she couldn't sing the song without crying should have been a big enough clue. Story 10. In Disney's Gargoyles, Goliath believes his entire clan is either dead or turned permanently into stone, and he asks Magus to turn him into stone forever as well. Yes, there were improbable terms to break the curse, but effectively, he was committing self-deletion. He knew he was among the last of his kind and did not know if he would ever wake up again. He left behind a rookery full of eggs, the next generation, when he did so. Also, in the City of Stone, Demona smashes statues that are humans turned to stone. She kills people on screen in a Disney cartoon. Lots more examples from Gargoyles, but those two stick out. Story 11. The Flintstones did Winston's cigarette commercials. So the thing about that is, originally, the Flintstones was made for an adult audience, being a stone-aged parody of the Honeymooners. It didn't become family-friendly until later on, so the cigarette commercial wasn't too out of place at the time. Story 12. Splinter died twice on screen in TMNT 2012. And Coco from Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends is the imaginary friend of a kid who got stuck on an island after a plane crash. Story 13. The director of Ed, Edd n Eddy was shot by Vancouver police when he was suffering a mental breakdown. Police claimed he attacked them with a weapon, but witnesses say he was on his knees and it was like an execution. Story 14. Creator of the Cartoon Network show Clarence got fired after assaulting an Adventure Time storyboarder. Apparently he also has tremendous mental health episodes and had to be sent to a hospital. It was really sad and happened when the first season had recently started airing. Story 15. The host of Total Drama Island is a felon convicted of so many crimes. This includes fraud, identity theft, murder. Think of a crime and he's done it. I'm not even kidding. Look at the wiki site. Story 16. Donald Duck fought in World War II and has PTSD. In an episode, he wakes up and thinks he's in a Japanese minefield, and he is in a lot of World War II cartoons. Story 17. There was a banned episode of Pingu that featured a disturbing walrus. The episode was later put back in rotation, but with a warning to parents about the episode. Story 18. There's an episode of Dexter's Laboratory where he cusses a lot. It was considered apocryphal for a while until they released a censored version a few years back. Some fans made their own edits to add back in the swearing. Story 19. Adventure Time is full of occult references, but my favorite one is in the episode All the Little People, in which the Magic Man says, "Do what thou'st will be the whole piece of law," which is taken from Aleister Crowley's "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law." Going into the episode itself, Finn has a bag full of miniature clones of himself and all his friends. He starts forcing them to get romantic and really odd pairings until they have a super aggressive fight and become mentally unwell reflections of the real people. Then he apologizes to them by shaking them all really hard. The whole episode was fucked. Story 20. Before Rick and Morty was Rick and Morty, it was a web series known as Doc and Marty. The pilot episode involves Marty blowing Doc. I remember when it was first posted to Reddit before Rick and Morty was a thing. Justin Rowland is a fucked up dude. Story 21. Ben 10 has a rather dark episode wherein he fails to save the universe from complete destruction, and it ends up with only himself as Alien X existing, before he uses Alien X to recreate the universe and everyone in it, though this universe has quite a few differences from the old one. The takeaway here is that Ben is the only survivor of an entire universe, and every character we'd meet up until that point is dead, and the ones from then onwards were mere copies of their original selves. Story 22. When the Wind Blows is a movie that uses a bright palette and pleasant childhood aesthetic to tell the story of nuclear attack aftermath could-be's. It follows an awfully gullible elderly couple with an overzealous trust in their government as they go on with their lives after the strike, which progressively gets worse as they succumb to radiation poison. Sounds bad? The pamphlet they seem to rely on is real, and it's just out of touch and unsettling. It has been suggested that its actual purpose is of allowing for better cleanup after you're dead. Story 23. The character Jack from Beastars always seems happy and hard to offend because he was bred for being a tool for creating war tactics and to not feel remorse. This was expanded upon in the comic the series was based on, where he purposefully cuts onions, which are poisonous to him, to force his tear ducts to open and emulate a feeling of sadness. Story 24. The Powerpuff Girls was originally called Whoop-Ass Stew. It was a student film made by Craig McCracken at Cal Arts College, and seemed like it would have had more mature themes than PPG. Obviously, Hanna-Barbera mandated that it be more kid-friendly before they would air it. It was also the first appearance of the Amoeba Boys, and it's on YouTube if anyone wants to watch it. Story 25. Chowder got cancelled because of Aqua Teen Hunger Force. ATHF had a new movie coming out, and Cartoon Network really didn't think their promotional stunt through, and it ended up in a citywide bomb scare, and them having to pay a ton of money in fines and lawsuits. Strapped for cash, Cartoon Network had no choice but to cancel or sell some of their shows, and unfortunately, Chowder was one on the chopping block. Flapjack was a victim of it too. Story 26. Peppa Pig is set in a universe of sapient animals of roughly the same size and are all vegetarians. Insects, birds, and fish behave like animals. But somehow Peppa Pig and all her mammal classmates idolize a celebrity who is literally a walking, talking potato. Story 27. So all the Rugrats theories are complete bullshit, but Angelica may have led to the divorce of her real-life parents, Gabor Sisipo and Arlene Klasky. Arlene hated the character of Angelica, but Sisupo sided with the writers who wanted her more in the show. Probably not the only thing that split them apart, but it probably didn't help either. Story 28. There was a Tom and Jerry episode where Tom dies and goes to heaven. There, while waiting in the line of counter, they show a wet sack with baby kittens inside it, coming out and running towards trains. Ticket counter guy notices it and says, "What some people wouldn't do." He's talking about old times, when people used to tie up small kittens in the sack and let them drown in a river. Story 29. In one episode, SpongeBob and Mr. Krabs thought they killed a man and went to a cemetery to bury the body, got a ride from the police, and put the body in the trunk, then in the Krusty Krab freezer. But it turns out they only knocked him out. Then the police beat him because they thought he was a zombie. Wow. Just wow. Story 30. Another one is like the cartoon itself, and I'm talking about the animals of Farthing Wood. Long story short, some animals need to move to a new home after the humans there destroyed it. Trust me, it's way more f***ed up than you think. This has some really brutal scenes, like a baby mice being impaled or the hedgehog couple being run over by a truck. This should be at least for teenagers and adults, not kids. Story 31. When they aired daytime cartoons during the summers when I was a kid, during the commercial breaks mixed in with the ads for Polly Pocket and Transformers, there would be a ton of ads for antidepressants. What kid is going to ask his doctor about antidepressants? They weren't for the kids. They were for their miserable, unfulfilled stay-at-home parents. Story 32. Not really a cartoon show, but in a Muppets film from 2002, Kermit was shown a world where he never existed. Due to it being filmed around the summer of 2001, the Twin Towers were still in this world. This was the only time they were shown in the entire film. Suspicious. Story 33. Walt Disney had union organizers swept up by his government friends and sent to war. They would be artists working hard to make him rich, and as soon as they wanted fair labor practices, they would be on the front lines facing down Germans. Then after the war, he decided that people who were in the Union were communist, and so he would drive through the parking lot of where Union meetings were held and write down every license plate number to have them indiscriminately blacklisted. Story 34. I remember reading an interview with an animator who worked on the original Shira back in the 80s, made by Filmation, that there was some rather weird arguments from the producers over Shira not being ladylike enough, like a proper lady shouldn't pick up and throw a tank, despite the fact that's the literal point of the character. The most powerful woman in the universe. And there's an actual clip of her throwing a tank in the opening credits. Of course, there was a lot of pushback from the artists and directors that Shira should be kicking all kinds of ass and hurling tanks around. I noticed in the last season of the new Shira, there's a scene where she's throwing tanks around, and someone admonishes her for it saying, "We don't throw tanks at our friends." I can't help but wonder if that was a nod to the old Shira and the hard time they got for tossing tanks around. Story 35. A passage in the official journal number 3 from Gravity Falls has a passage from Bill about sock opera. The episode where when he stole Dipper's body, it explains that his plan was to steal and destroy the journal, then throw Dipper's body off of the Gravity Falls water tower and make it look like he jumped, then invites Mabel to do the same. Story 36. I know it's nothing too surprising, and the show has a final season that is based around this, but in Steven Universe, he is literally a young boy who has to save the universe, and it seems all fun at first, but he literally has his body destroyed over time, and held together by his gem half, and also his mom literally ruined his life and almost caused him to die on several occasions. And he had to establish peace on a planet where most people wanted him dead. Also, he literally never cared for himself through the whole thing, to the point where he abandons himself for so long that he literally turns into a giant monster. Story 37. Bikini Bottom is called that because of the Bikini Atoll. Around the 40s and 50s, the USA made nuclear tests there. All the characters of SpongeBob are truly like this because they're radioactive creatures. Story 38. Not a cartoon, but does anyone remember the kids' game show Double Dare from the 90s and the slime equivalent that would rain down on unsuccessful competitors? It was called a gack, which the target audience would have been unaware was Philadelphia street slang for heroin. Story 39. In Steven Universe, a stretchy girl was told to stand alone in a space garden while her owner left. The stretchy girl was then left there for 5,000 years. She was alone there for the eternity of the show until the movie was released. Story 40. The My Little Pony movie, I know there are a bunch, but I'm talking 80s/90s, was about a blob-like monster called the Schmooze that looks like a tsunami. It ends up covering everything, and they have to move into a new home called Paradise Estates. The whole movie was a ploy to sell the new pony dollhouse. My sister had it. It had a little plastic pool. Story 41. Invader Zim. In the Dark Harvest episode, Zim steals children's organs because he wants them for his own body. This episode was especially controversial, as murderer Scott Dulesky, who was tried and convicted for assassinating his neighbor in 2005, allegedly claimed it made him want to collect body parts. Story 42. DuckTales is in a universe of talking ducks and dogs. All the rich characters and good guys are white ducks, and the criminals, bad guys, and scoundrels are mostly brown dogs. The only bad ducks are those that are rich or have magical powers. In other words, Duckburg is the most racist place ever. Story 43. The reason Mickey and the other characters wear white gloves is because it allows their hands to be seen better. This is a reference to actors when they did blackface. They wore white gloves so the audience could see their hands and fingers moving. Story 44. The Wiley Coyote Roadrunner cartoons were a parody of the American dream. Wiley Coyote represents your basic blue-collar American. The Roadrunner represents the American dream. Wiley wants to capture the American dream and does it through buying stuff from Acme. Acme represents consumerism. No matter how hard he tries, Wiley can never capture the American dream because the Roadrunner defies all natural laws and avoids all the traps that Wiley sets up. If it was all about eating the Roadrunner, Wiley could have spent the money he wasted on Acme to buy food and not waste his time. So the moral is be happy with what you have and don't go chasing waterfalls. Story 45. Every character in Winnie the Pooh has a mental disorder. Winnie has an eating disorder, Eeyore has chronic depression, Tigger has ADHD, Christopher Robin has schizophrenia, etc. Look it up. Blew my mind. Story 46. One of the earliest magical girl anime was Magical Princess Minky Momo, and like most kids shows, it had toy maker sponsors. When those sponsors stopped funding the show due to lack of toy sales in spite of strong ratings, the writers of the show made an episode where the main character gets run over by a truck carrying toys.